Welcome to another episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast. Today we have a solo podcast, a solo episode. You've got me. Last episode we had a guest on, and we do have some guests scheduled in the future. But today, solo podcast, and I'm going to be covering a lot of topics that I get questions on from my own athletes and clients that I work with, and from just podcast listeners. Today's episode is going to be titled, What Metrics Really Matter for Progress, if you didn't check the title. And we're going to be going over all of these different metrics that athletes look at, whether they're runners, hybrid athletes, strength athletes, and they're metrics that I don't think you should really focus on. And I'm going to cover what you shouldn't focus on and what you should and how to measure progress. So if you're watching on YouTube, you probably see I have a little bit different setup today. So I am playing around with my podcast studio at the house. And if you're listening, you don't see, but you can hear. So hopefully the sound sounds good. I've got a new mic that I am trying and some new lights and things. So definitely let me know if you're watching or if you're listening, how things sound, how things look, and if you like it or not. Because I'm always trying to make these episodes better, more crisp, more clear, and easier to watch, pay attention to, and more engaging. So a quick intro to who I am if you haven't listened before, if this is your first episode. My name is Justin Jones. I'm a strength coach. I'm the owner and coach at Assemble Performance. And I work with athletes from a wide range of populations, from tactical athletes to endurance athletes, hybrid athletes, and just general population who want to be healthier and enjoy your lives more. I've been running myself for over 15 years and strength training for almost 10 years at this point, which is crazy. It is 2025 for anybody in the future who may be listening. And it's crazy how time flies. That said, this podcast exists to help you level up your life and your performance. And I'm really excited to get into today's topic because I get a lot of questions on it. Again, what metrics matter for progress? So a brief overview of the points we're going to go over today. First, I'm going to explain what metrics most people focus on and why those metrics are probably missing the mark a little bit. And then I'm going to explain what metrics you really should focus on for progress, including some nuance as far as how to focus on them and how some of that might be debated a little bit. And lastly, at the end, I'm going to give you one thing you can implement to start seeing progress today. So definitely stick around to the end because I'm very excited for that. Quick just life update for me, for anybody who's interested. I'm starting another college class tomorrow in prerequisites for my master's. And so today is my last day of freedom before that college class starts. I also still have my day job, still working on that. And that's been in a bit of a busier period. And then business growth, always client growth, and overall family's growing, things are going good. I'm ending a small weight cut that I was doing into the summer from my 50K. I put on a good amount, I wouldn't say a good amount, but some extra weight as I tried to fuel for the 50K training, carbs, and just overall manage my life stress. And so now I'm finishing up this cut phase and going into the summer, and I'm pretty excited. So it is May of 2025. So pretty excited for that. Life is going well, if anybody was interested. And now let's get into the podcast. Now first, what metrics do people focus on that are probably missing the mark a little bit? These metrics are things that are fun to look at. They look good on your Strava, they look good on your Instagram stories, and naturally you want to push them. You see other people on Strava posting their runs and their workouts, and you don't really know the history behind all of their training. And so it can become natural to really want to focus on the things that you see online that other people are doing. This goes back to humans being very tribal in nature. So humans, when we were cavemen, back in the cavemen days, we needed to exist in a tribe in order to survive. If we weren't in that tribe, if we did something to upset the other people in the tribe or get kicked out of the tribe or whatsoever, we were probably going to end up dead of starvation or exposure. And so we've developed, our brains, our nervous system have developed to want to stay a part of a tribe. We want to fit in and we don't want to be excommunicated. So for those of us in the fitness community, this can mean that we really start to push those vanity metrics almost, and we want to look good on Strava. We want things to look good for our friends, for the people that we know in our community that also train, because we want to be a part of that tribe. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Where it becomes a problem is when those become the only thing you focus on. And so I've broken these down into runners, lifters, and then hybrid athletes. Some of the things people focus on that tends to divert their attention away from what they should be. So we're going to kind of get into each topic and know that for the hybrid athletes, you're probably going to resonate with both running and lifting points, but there is an extra point that I'm going to add in here for the hybrid athlete specifically, or anybody training strength and endurance, whether it's a true hybrid goal, whether it's an obstacle course race or a Spartan race or something of that nature, a high rocks nowadays. So for runners, that first metric that people focus on that I think you should pay less attention to is miles per week. Now, miles per week is just the sum total of all the miles you're going to run within a week. We see athletes posting up their miles per week. You see on somebody's Strava, you can see how many miles per week they've run that week, and it becomes a really big measure of how much somebody's running, because that's basically what it is. However, as a coach, miles per week is really only useful for me so I can make sure that somebody's not overtraining, not going to become injured, and there are some guidelines if you're running a longer race as far as how many miles you want to be putting in. That said, miles per week is not an outcome, it's an input. The outcome is the adaptation that you're looking for. So if you are a marathon runner, you have certain adaptations you want to push as a runner, and that doesn't necessarily equal a very clean miles per week. Our bodies are not machines. Every single person is not the same. And a certain miles per week, say 50 miles per week, is not going to be the same for one person and another person. Their bodies are going to react somewhat differently, somewhat the same, and somewhat differently. You might see elite runners, they do huge miles per week, especially elite marathoners, half marathoners. They're running upwards of, some of them, 60, 70, 80, 90 plus miles per week. And so it's easy for runners to see those numbers and think that we need to work up to a high miles per week in order to be good. What you're missing with that, though, is that a higher mileage per week is not representative of their marathon times. It's more representative of how long they've been running. So as they've been running over the decades, they've gotten fitter and fitter, and they naturally push their running up and up and up to match that fitness. So miles per week is an input, not an output, and there are a lot of things that we can manipulate within the training program in order to get the same adaptation on lower miles per week. And I've done this with a lot of athletes who've come to me with injuries or starting a little later than they really should have been for marathons specifically. And I've peaked people for marathons at much lower miles per week and much lower long run volumes than a typical runner would desire. And they've still been able to go crush their marathon and crush their goals because we implemented other things that are going to help with the outcomes, the adaptations that we want, without having the same inputs, because a higher mileage per week than what we peaked them at would probably have injured them given their history and their background and everything. And this is where it becomes very individual, because that number is going to be very individual to you based on your background, your training history, your injury history, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing people focus on is average pace. So they like to see their average pace come down on a long run, week to week to week. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Inherently, this isn't a bad thing, because if you run the same pace from week to week at a faster pace, if you run the same run from week to week at a faster pace with the same effort level, that's going to, by definition, mean you're probably more fit. That said, there's a lot of metrics that go into average pace: the weather, mental space, hydration, fueling, the stress and accumulated fatigue throughout the week, which we're going to talk about later. And so I don't see average pace as a metric an athlete should focus on week to week. It's useful for me as a coach to see week to week and month to month the average pace for a similar run. But as an athlete, you're way too involved in the results to really use this as a useful metric. And we're going to get into later kind of the athlete versus the coach and results. But for you as an athlete, average pace is probably way too in the weeds for you to focus on and see meaningful progress and use it to inform your training. And then lastly, for runners, a big thing I see is the race predictor. So if you have a Garmin, you probably see on that Garmin, it gives you a predicted race time for your 5K, your 10K, half marathon, marathon, and I think that's it. I think it's those distances. Might show some more, might have been updated recently. You can see how little I actually look at it. Because this race predictor, it uses algorithms to to guesstimate your times for these different distances based on your current running fitness, that as it sees it based on your run times. You go out and do a speed session, it'll update your race predictor. You go out and do a long run, it'll update your race predictor based on your heart rate and pace and all of these different things. That said, it is an algorithm and it's not super consistent sometimes. If you have a Garmin, you're probably familiar with the training readiness or the body battery. Do you listen to that? That's my question for you. Do you listen to your training readiness specifically or your body battery? Most of the time, I find that training readiness and body battery, they kind of lag with how I personally feel. And again, there's memes all over the place now of the Garmin telling you you shouldn't train when you feel great and the Garmin telling you you should train when you feel horrible. And so these things aren't completely wrong, but they're also not perfect. And I don't see this as a very consistently useful metric for athletes to track to tell you if your fitness is improving or not. All right, now we're going to get into lifting. So we have a few different metrics for lifting that people focus on. The first two are number of exercises and number of weekly sets, either total weekly sets, total exercises, or you break them down to per muscle group or per muscle or per body part. There's a lot of different ways to break this down, but the number of exercises and the number of weekly sets are basically running miles per week, but for lifting. So it's just the total volume that you're doing per week, and it doesn't tell you anything about the intensity level, about the structure, where you put those sets in the week. Do you do them all on one day? Do you spread them out over multiple days? These numbers alone don't really tell you anything, and they're not a super useful metric to track progress as an athlete. Again, these are inputs. What are you inputting? And the actual adaptation is not always related to these. There's a lot of nuance that goes into it. Certainly weekly running miles per week and number of exercises and weekly sets for lifting are somewhat related to adaptation, but it depends on a lot more than just the numbers, than just the volume. There's the intensity, there's how it's laid out within the week, and even how it mixes with your life stress, with your sleep, with your other modalities of training, which we'll talk about. And so I don't see these as useful metrics for athletes to track fitness. You can track your inputs, but it's not going to tell you much about what fitness you're getting, at least not on the athlete side. And again, we'll talk about the athlete versus the coach in a minute and why I'm making this delineation. Next, we have estimated 1 RMs or 2 RMs, 3 RMs, 5 RMs. If you're not familiar, RM is repetition maximum, or how much weight you can do per reps maximum. So a 1 RM would be as much weight as you can lift for 1 rep. A 3 RM would be how much weight you can lift for 3 reps, and so on and so forth. So again, estimated or even true tests, if you go in weekly and test your 1 RM, that's not a great idea because your lifts shouldn't go up week to week. Your 1 RM shouldn't go up week to week because you have accumulated fatigue. And also the estimated, I'm not going to say much on this, estimated, again, it's an algorithm. It's equations, they work. Do they work that well though? It depends on you and who the baseline algorithm was built for. So I don't look at those too much. But if you go in every week and you test your 1 RM, your 3 RM weekly, you're not going to see meaningful progress. You're probably going to get discouraged and you're probably going to quit. And the reason is you have this accumulated fatigue session to session and week to week that builds up. And so your lifts aren't going to go up week to week. Some of them might, all of them probably won't. And this is where you get into progression plans and tapers and peaking phases. And that's beyond the scope of this episode. But just know that your lifts shouldn't go up every single week because you're going to be fatigued. And the point of a program is to fatigue you over time and then peak you for an event, which is going to involve some volume and intensity drop off depending on the type of training and the event. And so don't expect your lifts to go up every single week. Control your inputs, control the fact that you're training weekly and daily, maybe depending on your goals, but do not focus on your lifts week to week to week. You can focus on your lifts between month to month and quarter to quarter, so every 3 months of the year, but week to week is subject to a lot of noise, basically. And then lastly, for the lifters, runners do this as well, but it's aesthetics. Everybody wants to look good. I want to look good. I told you earlier in this episode that I just came off of a weight cut, a slight weight cut, not a ton, like 10 pounds. Everybody wants to look good. I accept this. I'm not telling you you're wrong for accepting that, for wanting to look better. But aesthetics are one of those things where your body fluctuates so much day to day and week to week. You can't make meaning from the noise until you stretch it out to a long enough time horizon. So when I work with somebody on a weight cut, we take progress photos, we do measurements, we track macros and weight, and we do that over multiple weeks and multiple months, and that's when you start to see a trend. I use this explanation all the time, so you may have heard it before from me, but if you look at the stock market over a 1 month period, it's pretty volatile. Even 3 months, sometimes it can be pretty volatile, which means up and down and up and down. But if you spread that out over 6 months, over 1 year, especially over 5 years and 10 years, a lot of those ups and downs, you can't even see them anymore because it smooths out. And so when it comes to aesthetics, when it comes to a lot of these numbers, it's not that they're not useful, but they're normally not useful in the time horizons that athletes are focusing on, even myself as my own athlete. And so we'll talk about this in a minute, but I have a coach for this reason and for a few other reasons. But as an athlete, you're really bought into the results, and you're even if you know better, it's very easy to be short-sighted and try to overinterpret data from week to week. And again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll talk about that in a minute. But overall, aesthetics, they should be tracked over a longer time horizon, and they don't have a direct correlation to your results or progress, especially over a short period of time. And now lastly, we have hybrid athletes. So hybrid athletes, really the biggest addition on top of all these other ones is just arbitrarily focusing on some of these metrics without an overall strategy. So for a hybrid athlete or anybody training in a concurrent manner, you're going to be pushing strength and endurance goals at the same time. Pushing strength and endurance goals at the same time means you're going to accumulate fatigue in multiple different modalities, in strength training, in running, maybe swimming, triathlon, whatever you're actually training for. And these are going to have an effect on each other. So we'll talk about what you should focus on in a minute because there is nuance here, but just know that arbitrarily looking at pacing and weights and miles per week and all of these things when you're doing strength and endurance training is gonna lead you to be frustrated. Now, really quick, if you're enjoying this show and you're getting value from it, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe, rate, and review the show. It helps me know what you like and helps me know how many people we're reaching and are engaging in the episodes. And it also helps me rank higher on the different podcast players on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc. And it helps me really reach more people with all of this good information that I'm working to put out for people. So that said, only good reviews. Don't leave any bad reviews. I'm just kidding. If you feel so inclined to leave a bad review, I would encourage you to do whatever you want. But overall, yeah, rate, review, subscribe, and I would really appreciate that. All right, so we've just spent about 20 minutes going into a little bit of an introduction and then what you shouldn't focus on. So now I want to get into what you should focus on and how you're actually going to be able to see progress. So the first thing that you should really focus on is known as RPE, or relative perceived exertion. Now, this is something you can use in conjunction with some of the metrics we talked about before. So this is where we get into some nuance. Those metrics might not be the best on their own, but they are useful with other metrics in mind, like RPE. So for example, did you run the same pace on this long run that you have the last few weeks, but you've slowly added speed work, other volume, maybe miles per week, maybe other lifting exercises? If you've slowly added things week to week and you've been able to keep a similar pace at a similar intensity, that is a sign of progress. You might not think so because you might think you need to be improving week to week to week to week. But honestly, really, if you think about it, you're performing the same as you did the week before with more added fatigue and stress. Same thing with lifting. If you're able to lift the same weights, but you've added more volume across running, across lifting, or even life stress, that's going to be proof you're fitter, because a week before, you wouldn't have been able to lift the same weight with the whole week in context of how much volume and intensity you've been doing. So relative perceived exertion is really good when you're thinking about overall how much you have in the week and pulling yourself back a little bit and looking at just how much accumulated fatigue you've gone into the session with. The next one is tracking progression over time in key sessions, not just kind of whenever you feel like it. So these key sessions are going to be things like every 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, you may do a time trial on the track, or you may do a heavy set of 2 or 3 on bench. Not a true rep 1RM, but just like a heavy set of 2 or 3. And these can be useful ways to track progress. But again, you're not doing this weekly, and you're not just doing this whenever you feel like it. You're intentionally programming these sessions in every 2, 3, 4 weeks to track your progress over time. And it's not just oh, I feel good today, I'm going to try to max out on bench. Or I feel good today, I'm going to just run this mile as hard as I can. These are key planned sessions that you're prepping yourself for, basically. Second or third at this point, we've touched on this a little bit already, but your ability to execute in sessions with the overall accumulated fatigue of your life. And so again, you've got accumulated fatigue from sessions, so fatigue that carries over from your lifts to your runs, from your runs to your lifts, from a lift to a lift, or whatever, from a run to a run. And you also have fatigue that accumulates from your life. Did you sleep poorly? Was your kid awake all night? Did somebody get sick that you know? Has somebody that you know died? Are you under a lot of stress at work? All of these things, they add stress to our bodies, and our nervous system doesn't really know the difference. It just knows, I feel stressed, I feel threatened, and I need to make sure that I'm protecting my resources and recovering and doing all the things that the body needs to do. And so if you're able to perform even a little bit worse than you did a few weeks prior, but you had a ton of more life stress or training stress, this is going to be a sign of progress, or at least not a sign of regression. Whereas a lot of people would see a lift go down or a run pace go down a little bit and they'd be concerned. When you start to take a second, take a different perspective, and see that within the context of your whole life, this is actually a really good performance, you can give yourself a little grace, and you can be sure that you are actually making progress despite what the number that day might have said. Another thing that I really think is important to track is how you feel around training. So things like your motivation, your fatigue patterns, are you anxious around training, et cetera, et cetera. There's plenty of different subjective measures to track here. But starting to feel way off from your baseline may be a sign that you might be overtraining, or just doing a little too much. Might not quite be overtraining, but maybe too much given your stress levels and overall how life is going. And now another thing to note here, though, is that sometimes you have to plan to feel horrible. So like a peak week for a half or full marathon where you're roughly 3-ish weeks out from the marathon, that's going to be your highest mileage week, your most intense week before you start to taper in for the race. And those weeks you normally feel horrible. Like I always feel horrible on those. Some people don't, some people do, but it can be very expected to feel horrible those weeks. And so stepping back and planning for these things, planning like, hey, I'm probably going to feel horrible this week because of my training load, because over the last 4 months, I've really built up for this, and this is my peak race. But that's to be expected, and I'm going to be okay. Or, hey, given my training loaded history, I probably shouldn't be feeling as bad as I feel right now. And then you can take a step back and start to ask yourself, why do I feel so bad? Did I do anything that would make me feel this bad? Have I had a lot more life stress? Did I only sleep 4 hours last night? And you can start to problem solve without being so reactive into, oh my gosh, I performed horribly, I feel horribly, things must be going horribly wrong, I'm doing everything wrong, I need to quit this program and do something else. That's not what you should be doing. Hopefully you know that at this point in this podcast. We've been talking a lot about pulling back, looking at a longer time horizon. Hopefully you know that that's not really the case. And then for hybrid athletes, really pulling back again and getting a new perspective on the context. So your strength sessions related to how much running volume you're doing. Your run paces related to how heavy and how much volume you're doing in the gym. For a hybrid athlete specifically, you have to look at how am I progressing overall athletically across all different disciplines, because they're gonna impact each other. Now we can do some cool things to minimize the overall impact from one session to the next for hybrid athletes, but it's not gonna get rid of everything. You are gonna have some accumulated soreness and fatigue from lifting to running and from running to lifting. And you have to take all that into context when you're looking at how am I progressing from week to week to week? Because you might have a few weeks in a row where your running stays pretty much the same, but your lifting shoots way up. Or you might have a few weeks in a row where your lifting stays about the same, but your running shoots up. You might even do whole periods where you only focus on one. So I personally have done some periods where I have just maintained my strength and pushed my running. And I've also done periods where I've just maintained my running and pushed my strength. And so you have to really take in the entire athlete, you as a human, the entire thing into consideration and say, like, am I progressing how I want to over everything over the last 3 months? Not just, oh my gosh, my lifts went down this week. I don't know why. Oh, wait a second. I ran a little extra and I actually PR'd my 5K the other day. So, hey, maybe pull out of your head a little bit. This isn't me being mean. I do this to myself too. But if that's you, I'm pulling you out of your head a little bit. It's okay. You're making progress overall. One bad session, one bad week, one bad month isn't a death sentence. Now, lastly, I wanted to touch on the athlete, the client versus the coach. So I have a coach for this reason, and I'm going to speak to you with the understanding that I also deal with this myself, even though I, quote unquote, should know better, because it's just human psychology. The phrase that I always tell people, the phrase I like to use is, you can't read the label from inside the box. So if you think of a box of cereal, if you're in the box, you can't read the label. If you're outside the box, it's crystal clear, clear as day. You can read the label. So when it comes to an athlete, I personally am very invested in my progress. You are probably very invested in your progress. It's really easy to get caught up in the minutia and in the little things that don't matter when you're inside the box, when you're the person who is making the progress, is doing the work, is feeling the pain, is feeling the soreness, feeling the hunger, having to shove your face full of food, or having to diet for your goals. It's really easy to get caught up in every little number and every little minutia and feel like, I'm putting in so much work and I haven't seen progress in this session for 2 weeks. Is this worth it? It's not just you that goes through this. Again, I go through this as well. Everyone I know goes through this. But if you can take a step back, a third-party perspective, and have a coach or a friend tell you, look at your training and tell you what's actually up, they have a different perspective. A non-training example would be anytime you struggle with something in life, or anytime a friend struggles with something in life. They might think it's the end of the world. You might think it's the end of the world. But as soon as you get a different perspective, you realize it doesn't really matter. It's not that big of a deal. And it's not that you are doing anything wrong. It's just that new perspectives are so powerful. And so when it comes to any of these numbers, a lot of them can be useful. But as the athlete, as the person inside the box, you really can't focus on these without getting in your head for a lot of people. Because you put in so much effort, so much pain, so much giving up things on the weekends, beers, whatever you're sacrificing in this phase of life to make the progress you want to make and hit whatever goals you're training for. You're sacrificing a lot, you're working really hard, and you just want to make sure that it's for something. You want to make sure my suffering is purposeful. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, amazing book, and this is more of a philosophical discussion at this point, says that a man who has a why can suffer anyhow. And so man, woman, whatever, at the time when the book was written, man was definitely used as a gender neutral term. At least that's the way I read it. I don't actually know. I wasn't alive at the time and not super big on etymology and the history of etymology. So I'm actually not sure, but that's what we're going to go with. So a man, a person who has a why can suffer almost anyhow or can endure almost anyhow. So you as the athlete, you just want to know that the suffering is working, it's purposeful, and it's worth it. And this is where having a coach is key. This is why I have a coach, because I don't want to have to think about these numbers. I don't want to look and say, oh my gosh, is this session number here representative of me not making progress? I want to give that to somebody who I can trust and say, I trust that they are taking care of this. I can just focus on my purpose. Why do I want to do this thing? Why do I want to run this marathon, this half marathon, do this meet, do this diet phase? I can focus on the more philosophical why, and I can outsource the how and make sure that it's taken care of. And I know that my how, my suffering is making me better. It's getting me to the place I want to get. Because at the end of the day, the reason people program hop, the reason people don't stick to what they set out to do isn't because they're not disciplined. A lot of the time it's because they don't know if the suffering that they're going through is worth it and is getting them what they want. So, philosophical discussion aside, I told you I was going to give you a practical takeaway, and I am. I want you to pick 1 to 2 things you want to get better at. Say a 5K time, a mile time, a back squat, a bench press, a deadlift, some other lift, a Zercher squat. If you are a glutton for punishment, a Zercher squat is a solid one. A Zercher clean, if you even know what that is. If you don't, look it up. It's super painful. I don't recommend you do it unless you really know what you're doing. If you didn't know what it was already, probably shouldn't be doing it. But pick 1 to 2 things you want to get better at and test your performance in that event after 3 to 5 days of lowered training volume, lowered training intensity. This is going to make sure you go into the session with as much energy as possible and just test it. Do a 5K time trial, do a 1RM bench with a spotter, obviously. Be safe. Do not come after me. This is not medical advice or specific training advice. You take all the risk. Little medical legal disclaimer there. But test your performance and then commit to a long enough term time horizon. So commit to 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe even more of intentional training towards this without analyzing your performance. Now, this is a challenge. This is something I have a really hard time doing myself because I'm really in the numbers. I'm really OCD about it. And so I challenge you to try this. I've tried it before. Obviously, I have a coach for a reason, but try this. Try to train for 6 to 8+ weeks intentionally without analyzing your performance. Just train hard, go in, control your inputs, and make sure you're recovering well, sleeping, eating, and keeping stock of, am I feeling overtrained or not? But do not overanalyze the numbers. In fact, I told you earlier, you could schedule in every 2, 3, 4 weeks a performance gate, a performance test. Don't do that. Just commit 6 to 8 weeks of training really hard for this and not analyzing your performance. Then at the end of that 6 to 8 weeks, do a slight taper. So pull back on the volume and the intensity a little bit, and then retest. Now, this gets you thinking more long-term. It pulls you out of the weeds a little bit, and it's also a mental challenge for you. Can I actually let go of some of these numbers week to week to week and humble myself and say, it's okay if these numbers don't look great. I'm training for something. I'm putting in the effort. Some days they'll look good. Some days they won't look good, but I have a plan and it's going to pay off long-term. Mental challenge for you. It's hard. It is. I'm not going to lie to you. It's difficult for people with my personality type and maybe people with your personality type. Some of you might think it's easy, and I love that for you. I'm so happy for you. It's not that easy for me. So do not self-sabotage your athletic development by jumping program to program, by getting overly stressed about certain numbers week to week to week, to day, and instead take a deep breath. Know that your work is paying off. Even if it's not perfect, it's still moving you in the right direction, and that's what matters. On that note, if you really want to dive deeper into some of the things that we've discussed currently today and maybe in past episodes, and you really want to see what this would look like for you individually, definitely check out the description. There's going to be a link there to schedule a completely free, pressure-free call with me, 30 minutes. I love to just learn more about you. So in this call, I'm going to learn a lot about you and your goals and what you want to focus on. And then I'm going to be able to give you very clear next steps, whether you come on and work as an athlete with me or whether you stay and do this on your own. I'm just going to give you some clear next steps, what you should focus on and what that might look like for you. And then from there, you can totally always come on as a client of mine or go off and do your own thing now with your more clarified knowledge about what you should be doing personally, individually moving forward. And if you want to contact me, if you have a question you'd like to see addressed on the podcast, or you just want to ask me something about my content or literally anything, my contact info is down in the description below. You can hit me up on Instagram or send me an email. Either of those will work. Instagram can be kind of weird sometimes with the message requests, so make sure you follow me if you don't before you message me. That way it comes to my inbox and doesn't go to spam. And if I don't respond in a few days, then email me because it probably went to my spam and I didn't see it. That said, I'm really excited to be back on the podcast weekly. I have some awesome episodes lined up next, and I'm just really excited to get these out to you guys. So if you haven't subscribed so you get the notifications when new episodes come out, and I will see you guys in the next episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast.